latest production employs a milk protein, which makes condoms technically forbidden to vegans.
This is Exploring Unusual Sex, the podcast about odd stuff that helps understanding everyday matters. Our host today, from Milan, Italy, is author, journalist and personal coach Ayzad.
Welcome! In this episode we talk about wrong-sized penises, combustible porn stars, uncharted erogenous zones, Scrooge McDuck's sex appeal and much more. Let's get starting, and the first topic is polyamory. A truly impressive statistic says that in the West 72% of people with a steady partner also have secret relationships or occasional flings with others. One of the most often quoted reasons is sexual boredom, which seems paradoxical considering all the energy invested in adultery, unless you know a well-known ethology phenomenon called Coolidge effect. The name comes from a 1930 anecdote about US President John Calvin Coolidge visiting a farm. Apparently, his wife had noticed a rooster who kept mating all the time, and she asked the guide how often he did it. The farmer answered it happened dozens of times a day, and the lady mischievously suggested to let the president know. When he was informed of it all, his first question was, "But does it do with the same hen every time?" "No, a different one each time," the guide answered. "Right," the other retorted. "Please tell this too to Mrs. Coolidge." And the conversation made history. Jokes aside, it is true that arousal perks up every time we meet a new person, partly due to biology, partly because when the initial discovery phase is over, you inevitably tend to identify the partner not only with passion, but also with the normal everyday problems of any relationship, and enthusiasm gets a bit curbed. Also, you better be aware of the chemistry of relations, not in the sense of feeling attuned, but in that of actual molecules. In fact, the infatuation you feel in the beginning is caused by your organism superproducing phenethylamine, a natural compound similar to amphetamine and with similar effects: euphoria, sexual arousal, loss of appetite, insomnia, and difficulty in properly assessing risks. That great feeling of love at first sight doesn't really depend on having found your soulmate, but on being to all extents high as a kite. This weird mechanism has an evolutionary purpose, since it drives the new couple to have lots of sex and therefore to increase the probability of producing an offspring. For the very same reason, however, the phenethylamine production decreases to exhaustion within 3 or 4 years. That's when the kids should have arrived already, so to better protect and raise them, it is advisable that the parents stop being self-centered. And surprise, surprise, 3 years and a half is exactly the average span of a relationship, because if you are not aware of all of that, it is easy to mistake the crash after the trip for the end of love, which is actually a whole different beast based on the effort of creating positive emotions and well-being for yourself and your partner. Truth to be told, sometimes you just fall in love with more persons at the same time because it is not realistic for even the best partner in the world to embody every single characteristic we like, and it is natural to meet someone who can give us whatever is lacking in our main relation. But what happens in those cases? It depends. People usually react like they do in soap operas, despairing and throwing away everything the couple had built in time, including their love, which is obviously a pity, especially because it doesn't solve anything and typically only brings you to repeat all the same mistakes with the next partner. Or you can adopt a different approach, such as polyamory.
Let me interrupt you just a sec for an important reminder. The episode notes contain all the links to the topics mentioned in the podcast, and if you want to dig deeper, you will find hundreds of further articles on the Ayzad.com website.
The whole polyamory idea is based on 2 observations. The first is that, as we have seen, being in love with more than one person at a time is more frequent than the opposite. The second is that, if the romantic idea of soulmates has nothing to do with reality, maybe that is also true of other concepts, like for example the hardly sustainable nuclear family, normalized in the previous century and in very different social conditions than today's. A Its innovation instead is simply to manage it all openly and ethically, just as suggested by the book that is thought as a Bible on the subject, titled The Ethical Slut. Besides telling each other everything, the trick is also defining from the start the rules for partners. Do we all meet together or separately? Just long relationships or occasional encounters too? Do we wish to live under one roof or not? Is there a main couple with satellites who come and go, or every member has the same exact rights and duties? Like with every form of adult sexuality, there are no fixed rules except that of clear communication and of always striving for everyone's well-being. Even if you start off with the best of intentions, though, jealousy can rear up its ugly head, which is obviously incompatible with this sort of arrangement. Polyamorists deal with it proactively, striving to substitute it with a less egotistic feeling of compersion, meaning the joy of seeing your partner happy, even if temporarily with someone else. Some are better at this than others, but polyamorous families are growing, so much so they have built mutual support associations that even organize courses to learn how to better manage relationships. I wouldn't know worldwide, but here in Italy, for example, we have one called Reti, running the yearly OpenCon convention, where each participant is required to take part to orientation classes driving home the ethical and politeness principles necessary to hotel full of polyamorists from blowing up. Meetings like that are useful to exchange experiences and discuss both the practical advantages of extended relationships and the challenges they bring, even in terms of social complications. How do you educate your children within a poly relation, for example, and above all, how do you integrate them with kids from more traditional families? How do you manage the limitations of a law code expecting only one life partner, or even just the prejudices of your neighbors? There are plenty of issues, yet the polyamory culture keeps progressing thanks to its secret ingredient, always putting lots of love into it.
The Sexual Explorers Manifesto is a global initiative to spread a healthier and more positive approach to sexuality. You can easily find it with an online search, but in the meantime, let's take a closer look at one of its 15 items. Today's one says:
Sexuality isn't limited to physical genital stimulation, and even that isn't limited to intercourse. Different belief systems interpret the concept of sex itself differently, limiting it in the most restrictive cases to heterosexual coitus for reproduction purposes only. However, since the sole valid way to approach any subject is being objective, it is essential to acknowledge that the human body can find erotic countless stimulations, even if not localized on common erogenous zones and even of types not usually thought as sexual. Also, imagination, fantasy, and individual experience may lead to sexual pleasure by very personal but not less effective mind paths. When dealing with sexuality, this calls for considering every source of pleasure with the same dignity.
This is your moment. In every episode, we pick one question among those sent to our expert at podcast@ayzad.com. So let's get writing to get an answer like this.
The first episode of Exploring Unusual Sex only went live this morning, so I dug up today's question from the last few days' messages to my website. This is by Tippy the Psychedelic Unicorn, who besides having a splendid name, wrote, "Go on, destroy my every last hope once and for all. Is it true that there is a scientific reason for girls always choosing the rich guys? P.S. I am 21 and jobless." Well, let me put it this way. You are probably referring to an ethology theory that stems from the observation of several animal species, whose female's primal instinct is to acquire food and protection to ensure a chance of having a healthy offspring. In their case, this means mating with the so-called alpha males, while among humans those characteristics are actually related more to the bank account size than the clothes. That's why some claim that the terribly strange passion felt by so many women toward healthy carriers of platinum card, yacht, convertible and mansion is the legacy of an ancestral call. In a pinch, supermodels would tend to marry millionaire athletes only due to their extra strong maternal instinct inescapably dominating their will. Another explanation may come from themophilia, which is the fetishism for wealth and power. History tells us of several famous cases, like the Roman Emperor Caligula, who masturbated while rolling in gold, like an early impression of Scrooge McDuck. But often it isn't easy to understand where playing greed ends and pure sexual arousal begins. However, my personal opinion is that, all in all, although stereotypes are usually born out of some truth, it is foolish to fit them or use them as scapegoats for one's problems. Whatever the gender, it is actually natural for everyone to seek out partners who can make us feel well, but life experiences rapidly teach us that financial wellness is way less important than its emotional, sentimental, and why not sexual components. I know it sounds like a Disney movie quote, but to be sincere and reliable, treating people with respect and to cherishing the joy of making their lives more pleasant really is the best way of making someone similarly inclined fall for you. And believe me, that is actually priceless. After solving this doubt too, I want to remind everyone that sex should always be a pleasure, not a problem, even when it is uncommon. However, if you are experiencing issues, I can help you as a personal coach to discover together the ideal strategy to win back your happiness in this field. You can get in touch through my website Ayzad.com, spelled Ayzad, and saying you are a listener of this podcast will earn you a 20% discount on the first session.
This episode is almost over, but we still have time to read one entry from XXX, the Dictionary of Unusual Sex, available in online bookstores everywhere, but in Italian only for the moment.
Today's entry is a name, Savita Babi. She is the 29-year-old lookalike of Bollywood star Sheetal Babi, and she is considered to be the first Indian porn star thanks to her 2008 debut in The Brass Salesman, a resounding success also due to its being freely distributed on the web. Online pornography in India, however, is tolerated but technically illegal, so when the government undertook an exemplary and unprecedented censorship action against the deeds of this housewife-turned-liberal icon, Savita, whose true name was Savita Patel, reacted in the most traditional way possible. Rather than becoming pariah, she promised to immolate herself. In 2009, her producer Punita Agarwal launched a dramatic appeal online from his British office to mobilize Indian intellectuals to support freedom of sexual expression, update the laws and save her. But in spite of a fierce media debate, there was nothing to do. If this story sounds absurd, just wait for the best part. Savita Babi managed to raise such a ruckus despite being just a comic book character. And since that condition also carries some advantages with it, the lady luckily resurrected in a subscription-based website hosted in the West, and she is doing very well in more senses than one, even inspiring a movie. In Bollywood, of course. And that really was it. Before leaving you with one last unusual sex fact, I want to thank you for listening and invite you to follow me on my social networks and above all on my website, Ayzad.com, which is also the ideal place to sign up for my newsletter. That way you'll get straight in your inbox new articles, reviews, invitations to events, and the notification for new podcast episodes which you can listen to and comment pretty much everywhere, like iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Spreaker, and so on. If you liked exploring unusual sex, I would also like to invite you to fill the Tell Me About You form you can find linked in the episode notes, so you will help me make the next episodes even better and closer to your tastes. Finally, you can also lend a hand by telling your friends about this podcast and writing about it on your social networks. Thanks, and before moving on to the next episode, here's the fact I promised you. A 2006 study found that 45% of men wish for a larger penis, while 0.2% would want it smaller. The women not satisfied with a partner's size, however, are merely 15%.